All right, today we're diving deep into one of the most intense moments in all of ancient history. We're talking about the final dramatic overlap in the lives of two absolute titans, David and Saul. A whole kingdom is literally on the brink, and the story is about to take a final, fateful turn. So the writer of 1 Samuel does something really clever here. For a few chapters, it's like the camera just cuts back and forth between David and Saul. It's like a split-screen movie. On one side, you have David, who's on the rise. He's guided by God. And on the other, you have Saul, who's just spiraling down, totally cut off from any divine help. Now, this contrast, it's no accident. It's all designed to crank up the tension and make a really powerful argument about who the true king is meant to be. Okay, so let's jump right in. We find David in what you'd call a classic rock and a hard place situation. He's been living with the Philistines, faking loyalty to their king Achish. The thing is, he's played his part so well, he's been so convincing, that now King Achish expects him and his 600 soldiers to join the entire Philistine army in a huge war against his own people, Israel. Talk about a bind. Now, while King Achish completely trusts David, his commanders, not so much. They are extremely suspicious. They're like, wait a minute, isn't this the guy from that hit song they're always singing in Israel? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. They know exactly who he is. He's Israel's greatest warrior, and there is no way they want him anywhere near their army when the fighting starts. So how on earth does David get out of this mess? Well, what's amazing is that it's not his own clever plan. It's really divine providence working through the enemy's own paranoia. The Philistine commanders basically force their king's hand, and Achish has to tell David he can't come. And David, he's such a good actor, he even pretends to be upset. He says, but what have I done? Why can't I go fight the enemies of my lord the king? It's just a masterclass in deception, because Achish thinks he means the Israelites, but David secretly means Saul. And boom, just like that, he's off the hook. So yeah, David totally dodges a massive bullet. He avoids having to make that impossible choice: betray his people or betray his host. He and his men turn around and start the journey back home, back to their camp at a place called Ziklag. But the relief doesn't last long. When they get back, it's a complete nightmare. They walk into a scene of total devastation. A raiding party of Amalekites has stormed through, burned their town to the ground, and kidnapped every single one of their family members. Their wives, their sons, their daughters, everyone is gone. You can just imagine the heartbreak. The grief is just overwhelming. And it gets worse. His own guys, the 600 men who followed him through thick and thin, they are so broken and angry that they actually turn on him. They blame him for the whole disaster, and they start talking about stoning him to death. I mean, this is absolute rock bottom for David. And right here, this is the key moment. This is what the whole story has been building towards. Remember what Saul did when he was desperate? God was silent, so he broke the law and went to a medium. Total disaster. Now look at David. In his absolute darkest hour, when his own men want to kill him, what does he do? He found strength in the Lord his God. He calls for the priest, he asks God what to do, and he gets an answer. Immediate, clear as day. Pursue them, you will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. They take off. Now get this. 200 of his guys are just too exhausted to go on, but David keeps pushing with the 400 who can. And then another little miracle. They find an abandoned Egyptian slave who is left for dead, and he leads them right to the enemy camp. They launch a surprise attack and won a huge victory, getting everyone and everything back. And then, in a crucial act of leadership, David insists that everyone gets an equal share of the plunder, even the 200 guys who were too tired to fight. So while all this is happening, David being the hero, rescuing his people, showing great leadership, the camera swings back. It goes back to that very battle he just managed to avoid. And on Mount Gilboa, Saul's story is coming to its tragic and honestly inevitable end. It's a total disaster. The Israelite army is collapsing. The Philistines are everywhere. Saul's own sons, including his best friend Jonathan, are killed right in front of him. And then the archers find him, and he's badly wounded. He knows what's coming next: capture, torture, public humiliation. So he begs his own armor-bearer, just kill me. Don't let them take me alive. Okay, hold on. Before we see how this plays out, you need to know about this really cool literary trick the writer uses. It's called narrative typology. Basically, it's when a story is written to sound just like an older well-known story, so that you, the reader, will connect the dots between the characters and events. And this is where it gets wild. The way Saul dies, it's a direct callback, almost a carbon copy of how this other really bad king named Abimelech died, way back in the book of Judges. Think about it. Abimelech was a mass murderer, just like Saul massacred the priests at Nob. Abimelech was mortally wounded in battle and asked his armor-bearer to finish him off. Sound familiar? The author is basically screaming at us. Saul isn't just a failed king. He went out like a classic villain. So the armor-bearer refuses to do it. Saul takes his own sword and falls on it. The next day is just gruesome. The Philistines find his body, they cut off his head, and they nail his corpse to the city wall of Beit-Shan for everyone to see. But then, there's this incredible final act of loyalty. The men from a town called Jabesh-Gilead, a town Saul had saved in his finest hour years ago, they hear about this, and they march all night on a daring, heroic mission to get his body back and give him a proper burial. So, you have to ask yourself, why structure the story this way? Why keep jumping between David's stunning victory and Saul's tragic defeat? Well, it's because this isn't just a history report. This is a masterful piece of political argument, and it's designed to answer a very specific, very dangerous charge. The writer is basically fighting ancient fake news. You can just hear the rumors swirling around from Saul's home tribe. That David guy, he's a traitor. He was living with the Philistines. He was probably there with them, cheering on the day our king died. And an accusation like that, it's powerful. It could have totally destroyed David's legitimacy and his claim to the throne. So these chapters, they're the author's point-by-point rebuttal. It's a complete takedown of that rumor. First, was David a traitor? No, God himself got him out of that battle. Second, where was he when Saul died? Providentially, far away. Third, so what was he doing? Oh, just fighting Israel's other enemies, the Amalekites, and rescuing captured Israelites. The whole time, while Saul is getting radio silence from God, David is getting clear directions. While Saul leads Israel to ruin, David leads his men to victory. The story systematically dismantles the slander and builds an ironclad case for David as God's chosen king. What this ancient story really reminds us is that history is rarely just a list of facts. It's an interpretation. It's a shaping of events designed to make a point. And it leaves us with a question we can apply to any narrative we ever encounter. If every story is an argument, what is this one trying to convince you of?